Hey everyone, Desert Gold. They just finished filming a video on crimping, when to crimp and not to crimp, and I guess it's pretty ironic because while I'm waiting for it to load, that's why the other camera's in use right now, I decided to just look around, see some videos, and came across NIHAP's New York Half-Ass Preppers VR to Ebomi and myself, and when you see this video, I swear, I think you're gonna think that I watched his first and patterned mine after it. It's just that close in ideas. NIHAP put a very concise and well put together explanation on crimping of pistol rounds. Used a lot of the techniques to much better extent than I did. Obviously, it helps not to have shaky hands and whatnot, but the tone of the video kind of led me to think that some of the things I'm saying are either being misinterpreted or misunderstood, and so I thought I'd do this little prelogue to maybe clear up some misconceptions. Everything that NIHAP says in his video is absolutely correct. I think where the confusion is coming in is when I state that I don't crimp my semi-rounds. And what I guess I am referring to is, again, this is one of my 10s. And I use my seating die as a, if you want to call it a debelling and possibly a mild taper crimp, but I don't, for me, I guess a roll crimp is a genuine crimp, and a mild taper crimp, as is stated in the Lyman manual. I've kind of shied away from a mild taper crimp because the definition of mild taper crimp is sometimes taken too far with especially new reloaders. My example has always been, if you could, in your finished product, if you can feel the edge of the case mouth by running your finger across from the bullet head to the case, you've got a perfect crimp or bullet seating, if you will. Now, if you can't feel it, then it's rolled in at the case mouth too much, and I don't have one that's overly crimped here, but generally you can, this is a 40, and the same thing, you can run your finger across the bullet, across over the case mouth to the wall of the case, and you can feel where the case mouth starts. That is if you want to call it a mild taper crimp, I just call it a properly seated bullet. And the bell has been removed. There's no real definition of a rolling in or any kind of general taper. And as I stated before, I have never had any issues with bullets changing their seating depth with the process that I use. Once again, if I'm still being vague in what I'm trying to say, ask a specific question, post it below, and I'm sure that I'll be able to come up with it. Anyway, hope you enjoy the upcoming video. I'm kind of shocked as to the timing and how close the two subjects came together. Pretty cool, actually. Anyway, there's good information, I think, from both. Desert Gold, enjoy the vid. Hello everyone, Desert Gold here. Thought I'd put together a video on something that seems to be still a little, how shall I say, not confusing, but muddled. How will put it, muddled, as far as let's say handgun reloaders and whether or not to crimp a round or not. I've done a couple of videos on to crimp or not to crimp a year or two ago. The second one I felt got into a lot more detail as far as trying to explain the effects of crimping semi-automatic straight wall cases and problems that you would face with head spacing. Before I go any further, this is a complex topic as demonstrated by the number of emails and PMs I get with questions as still pertaining to this issue. So this might be a longer video. Again, the disclaimers that I always have to put in and now are that yes, you will see some tremors. It has nothing to do with any kind of alcoholic consumption, slow speech patterns, and my new one is that this might contain some educational information. So if any of those things are not palatable to your entertainment structure, then I suggest just kind of move on. Anyway, as I stated, I still get numerous questions as from newer, I must qualify, newer reloaders regarding this crimping or not to crimp on pistol rounds. I'm going to focus on pistol rounds today just to keep it somewhat curtailed. Necked rifle cartridges fall into a different guideline. Anyway, what is the premise on crimping or not crimping a smooth wall semi-automatic cartridge? And what is the premise to crimp or not crimp a revolver cartridge? Well, I've explained it a few times. I'm going to try and really break it down. I was going to start with some physics and discuss tangential and rotational or radius forces, and I decided I did not want to get into sines, coefficients, and cosines and tangents and other geometric discussions and bore the crap out of everybody. So what I decided to do was make it more of a show and tell type of discussion. So for purposes of this video, I will be using my Super Red Hawk 454 Casull as the revolver constituent. And for the semi-autos, I will be using my Ruger LC9S, and even brought out the little Taurus 1911. Okay. So, what is the main foundation of whether or not you're going to crimp a pistol round? The main concern that a reloader should take into consideration is what is holding the bullet in place at the time of ignition. or firing. In a pistol, or a revolver, I should say, the only thing holding the rounds in the cylinder, obviously. I don't know if I'm getting that. Yeah, I think so. All right, so let's just say we're gonna put a few rounds into the caisson, right? This is properly inserted rounds, and they are live, by the way. So they are being held in place right now, right? Not so much anymore, right? So what's happened here is obviously pretty straightforward. The only thing keeping those rounds in their firing position is the cylinder. So that cylinder becomes part of the chamber, okay? Pretty straightforward also. But let's look at that. Let's take a closer look at this chamber situation. And yeah, I don't want to get too much. You can obviously see the space between the cylinder and the back of the chamber. It's quite a bit there. So the main concern is bullet setback on higher recoil rounds, such as this 454 caisson. So let's reintroduce those rounds into the chamber. And have another look. The rounds are sitting at the bottom of the chamber. I'm hoping you can see that the rounds are sitting in their proper positions in the chamber, and yet you still see some gap behind them. All right, so what we're going to do is try and demonstrate why a crimp, and as I've shown you before, is very important on this particular firearm and other revolvers. And you can see, I hope you can see, let's see. You can see the pretty serious crimp on this, I hope. Now, I've had people write me and say that whether or not it's a semi or a revolver, that they use the provided crimping die if it came with it. And I try to dissuade them on semis, but some people have their minds made up. Anyway, I have loaded 3 live rounds into the bottom 3 chambers on this revolver. I'm going to try and see if I can get this to show up, but I don't know if you can see it, but the space is still there. The rounds are seated And the light's still coming through rather easily, okay? Now, getting into the tangential and rotational forces, a revolver is going to have recoil, which is tangential, and that is the first microsecond, the felt recoil coming back, and then the normal snap of the rotational forces. And as the weapon rotates forcefully, I might add, look what has happened to these rounds, and I'm not even sure you're going to see it. Okay. And in fact, if you listen, you probably can hear them. You hear them? That's your rounds going back into position. Weapon fires, bam! They're thrown up against the back of the chamber. So with that kind of force, yes, you're going to have to take into consideration bullet setback, and that's why you have to have a nice crimp on a revolver round. Now, what's the difference with semi rounds? Okay, why do we have to worry about not putting a crimp on it? Well, let's take a look at it. First of all, these are my well, this is a 10 mil magazine loaded with 9x25 Dillons at this particular juncture. This is my Ruger LC9S carry. It's currently got 9s in it. Can you hear anything? How about the nut? Huh? No, you're not going to hear anything. Why is that? Well, a good mag anyway. It's going to have a nice spring in it, holding it up for the feeding position. Secondly, a well-built mag is going to have proper sizing for the round, and it's going to sit back firmly against the back of the mag. So there's no room, no play, no this or that flying around in there. It's in the weapon, and it stays in place. Okay? So you have two different environments here. You have the revolver with its rather open system, and then you have your semi with its more closed system, if you will. Now, what that entails is a different kind of mechanism. The mechanism is the chamber itself on the particular firearm being used. This is a 10 mil barrel, and the most important part that I was trying to get across to people is in semi-autos, the round head spaces off of, I have to find a 10 mil here. So the very important part that I'm trying to make with semis and crimping is that, as I've said numerous times before that the headspace is dictated by the case mouth and where it sits in the chamber. So if you crimp this, and I'm going to try and demonstrate that in an exaggerated way here in a minute, but if you bring the crimp in too much, when it goes into the chamber, it's going to sit too deeply, changing pressures and all sorts of feeding issues, ejection issues, a number of different pain in the ass type of malfunctions, but most importantly it could be dangerous as far as changing pressure buildup. But anyway, as you can see, this thing is sitting right level with the feed ramps, okay? You see that? Now what would happen if we put a heavy crimp on this? So let's do this. What I'm gonna do, actually, I already pretty much did it. The best way I could, in an exaggerated way, just to demonstrate this, is to use a crimp that I use on my 9x25s. This is a 10 mil case that has been necked to 9x25, but for all practical purposes, the necking is an exaggerated crimp in this particular situation. You can see it's been brought in quite a bit. Now, once again, we have our 10 mil sitting perfectly flush with the feed ramps. Now, what do you think is going to happen with a necking? In this case, it's a serious necking on the case. Where's the case? It's sitting all the way at the bottom of the chamber. Granted, this is an extreme exaggeration, but this points out what's really happening when you crimp a semi-auto round. The head spaces at the end of the chamber, if that is changed on your round to a different position, then that round's going to sit in the chamber in a different position. So it's very important that you try not to get carried away with crimping on semi-auto rounds that are not necked. Pretty much, I'm hoping that covers an explanation. Reiterating, this has not been necked, and as I've said before, my loads usually run over about 1350 feet per second, and I've never had a bullet setback ever once. The whole concept of the rotational and tangential forces on a semi, if you look at this weapon, the axis is pretty much right along your arm, okay? So your arm along with your hands are gonna take some of that recoil, almost like a shock absorber. It's in a more direct line with your shooting posture. Same with even a 1911, a little bigger, but same thing, right? More along. Now you're going to get obviously more rotational and tangential forces in here, but then again, the magazines that we use in these firearms are much more suited for holding them in place. And what about the revolver? Okay, well, look at this. Still, your arms are going to obviously act as some sort of recoil system, but the plane, just by definition of the shape of this, is sitting much higher, almost twice as high as the semis that I've shown you. Well, what does that mean? The tangential forces is above your wrist. Rotational forces are acting much more aggressively above your wrist. So this is why you see these idiots that like to put out these fail videos, and they give their poor girlfriend a 500 Smith & Wesson or a 454 Casull, and they get all, you know, ready to shoot, and they may have even told their girlfriend or spouse or whoever is doing this that it's going to have a little kick to it, you know. These individuals have probably never shot something of this caliber before and should not be shooting it. And that's why you see these people, these girls getting ready, and they shoot it, and their reward is a nice skull crack from the barrel. Not funny, and it's not my way of getting ratings on a video. I think it's poor taste. And I'd rather see a new shooter practice and learn on something that they can develop. Find, you know, better techniques, and not develop a fear of a firearm because of some idiotic prank that was pulled on them. I don't see that. Anyway, I hope this clears some of the issues. If not, like I said, let me know. This is Desert Gold. You guys have fun. Be safe.